Okay, let's talk about data fetching in Next.js, because wow, has it changed. If you're coming from the Pages router, the new app router is a whole different ballgame. In the next few minutes, we are going to break down this new world and get you up to speed on the core patterns you need to be building faster, more modern apps.
So let's just dive right in. This isn't just some minor update we're talking about. The app router is a complete, ground-up rethinking of how we get data from a server into our components. It's a fundamental shift.
And this slide right here says it all. I mean, just look at the difference. On the left, you've got the old way, these special framework-specific functions like get server-side props that lived outside your component. And on the right, that's the new way. It's just a simple, beautiful async await fetch living right inside your component. We're getting rid of all that boilerplate and just writing modern JavaScript again. It's awesome.
So what's the magic making this all possible? Well, it's this thing called React Server Components, or RSCs. And here's the key. They are now the default in the app directory. This means, by default, your components run on the server, they fetch their data on the server, and they only send the finished HTML to the browser. This idea is the foundation for, well, everything else we're about to cover.
Okay, so that brings us to the very first and maybe most important choice you're going to have to make every time you create a component in this new world.
You know, this new model really forces you to stop and think. You have to be super intentional about where your code actually runs. Is this something that should happen on the server, or does it belong in the user's browser? It's a critical decision. And this table breaks it down perfectly for you. Server components? They run on the server, obviously. They're amazing for that initial page load, for SEO, and get this, your secret keys and credentials are totally safe. You can even talk directly to your database, which is a game changer. Client components, on the other hand, run in the browser. They're all about interactivity, state, and user events. And for data, they need to call an API.
So the big takeaway here is that by defaulting to server components, you get these huge wins right out of the box. You get better performance because you're sending way less JavaScript to the client. You get way better security because your private keys never leave the server. And your whole architecture just gets simpler. Sometimes you don't even need to build a separate API layer anymore.
But of course, your app needs to be interactive, right? People have to click things. So for anything that needs user input or state management with hooks like use state or use effect, you just make an explicit choice. You pop this little use client directive right at the top of the file. That's your signal to Next.js that says, hey, this component, it belongs in the browser.
All right, so we figured out where to put our components. Now with that foundation solid, let's talk about the patterns that are going to make your application feel lightning fast and super responsive for your users.
Okay, you have to watch out for this one. It's a huge and often accidental performance killer, the request waterfall. It's exactly what it sounds like. One data request has to completely finish before the next one can even begin. As you can see here, we can't even start fetching the user's posts until we're totally done getting the user's data. It creates this long, totally unnecessary delay.
The fix, thankfully, is super powerful and elegant. Parallel fetching. You just wrap up all your requests in a promise.all, and they all fire off at the exact same time. Suddenly, your total load time isn't the sum of all your requests anymore. It's just the time it takes for your single, slowest request to finish. This is a massive, massive performance win.
But what happens if one of those requests is just, really slow? That's where streaming comes in to save the day. Instead of making the user wait for absolutely everything to be ready, the server starts sending the page in chunks. The static parts of your UI, the shell of the page, can show up almost instantly.
So think about it from the user's perspective. Instead of staring at a blank white screen, they immediately see the structure of your page. They see the header, the sidebar, maybe some cool loading skeletons. They know the app is working, which makes any wait feel so much shorter.
And then as each piece of data finishes loading on the server, it just streams right in and fills in those skeletons. The absolute key here is that a slow data fetch in one part of the page doesn't block the entire rest of the page from rendering and becoming interactive. And this new model also gives you this incredibly fine-grained control over your rendering strategy. You can have pages that are fully static, built just once, and then served instantly from a CDN for maximum speed. Or for things like a user dashboard, you can opt into dynamic rendering, where the page is built from scratch with fresh, personalized data on every single request. Now this all brings us to what I like to call the final boss of complexity, caching. Okay, so we've made our app incredibly fast, but how do we make sure that fast app is also showing the most up-to-date, fresh data? So Next.js gives you this really powerful, multi-layered cache system.
First, on the server, there's a data cache that remembers the results of your fetches. Then there's the full route cache that stores the final static HTML on a CDN. And finally, on the client, the router cache makes navigating between pages feel instantaneous. The real trick is learning how to manage all three when your data changes.
So here's the scenario. The data on your server changes, but your user is looking at a stale, cached page. What do? The answer is this simple function, router.refresh. It is the bridge between the server and client. You call it, and it tells the browser, hey, throw out your local cache and go get the fresh stuff from the server, all without needing a full disruptive page reload.
This slide basically lays out your entire toolkit, your whole command center for managing data freshness. You've got options to control caching for individual fetches, you can cache database queries, and you have these really powerful APIs to trigger on-demand updates for a specific page or even for data that's shared across many different routes.
Okay, wow, we have covered a lot of ground. So let's try to put it all together into a really practical playbook that you can take with you and use on your very next project.
Think of this matrix as your ultimate cheat sheet. Seriously. Need a static marketing page with great SEO? That's a server component, no question. Building a super interactive dashboard with lots of user-specific data? That's a job for a client component. Need to securely hit a third-party service? An API route handler is going to be your best friend. This chart will guide you to the right tool for the job every single time.
And please, remember these core rules. A fantastic pattern to use is fetching that initial data on the server, and then using client-side actions to trigger a refresh when things change. And a huge anti-pattern, something to avoid, is fetching everything you need for the entire page in your root layout. That just creates a massive bottleneck. Instead, the golden rule is, fetch your data as far down the component tree as possible, close to where it's actually used.
You know, this quote really captures the big picture here. We're moving away from this old way of thinking where data fetching was this separate, complicated task. Now, it's just integrated directly and naturally into our components. This whole shift empowers all of us to build faster, more secure, and just plain better applications.
So the real question to leave you with is this one. How will you take these new patterns, server components by default, streaming for a better UX, and much smarter caching? How will all of that change the way you build your next app? Because that's the real opportunity here.